attention you've ever gotten, too.
Just have to know your name. Thank you. Okay, thanks, Brett.
Hi, greetings everybody. It's great to have you all here to address this very important issue and this very important bill, the Stop Institutional Child Abuse Act. We have members of Congress from both sides of the aisle, from both the Senate and the House, which shows the broad support behind defending our children in these institutional settings. Then we have two survivors who are going to share their story, a couple experts who will share their story, and then we will introduce Paris Hilton, who has been the driving national voice, the driving national force behind this effort. So good afternoon, everybody. No matter who they are or their individual circumstances, children deserve to be treated with love, with compassion, with care and understanding, plain and simple. It doesn't matter whether it's at home or in their school or it's an institutional care facility. But when it comes to institutional care, we discover that too often, without oversight, love and compassion are in short supply. That in far too many facilities, institutional care has become institutional abuse. Time again, we hear stories of broken bones and sexual assaults, of using electric shock devices on children, even children with disabilities, even when the FDA has said that is not allowed. Stories of minors locked in psychiatric wards when not medically necessary. A 16-year-old at a facility in Michigan dying after multiple employees jumped on him, smothering him because he had thrown a sandwich. Story after story in this industry. Now, this industry receives roughly $23 billion a year in public funds. We have about 35,000 foster children who are sent into these institutional settings. We have about 25,000 other children sent into these institutional settings. 60,000 of our American youth with virtually no oversight whatsoever. This is not acceptable. Our children deserve better, and that's why we're here today to talk about the Stop Institutional Child Abuse Act. And it is my pleasure to introduce my colleague, John Cornyn, Senator from Texas. Welcome.
Thanks, Jeff. Well, thank you all for being here today. We know that we have a mental health crisis in this country, particularly exacerbated from the isolation many children lived in during the COVID-19 pandemic. But even prior to the pandemic, 1 in 5 children struggled with some kind of mental disorder. In 2021, self-injury and suicide skyrocketed, increasing 45% among 5 to 17-year-old children. Residential treatment programs are an important part of addressing this crisis, especially when a child may not have the support system they need at home. But there's a lack of transparency, as Senator Merkley said, within the industry that has led to far too many instances of intentional abuse. And even one case is too many. Many of these facilities do great work, but just one child harmed in their care, as I said, is too many. This legislation would strengthen accountability and transparency for youth programs across the United States. In order to hold bad actors accountable, we need to be able to look behind the curtain by creating a national database for youth residential program data. This legislation will help us do just that. Now, Coach Tommy Tuberville.
Thank you very much. Thanks for being here. Thank you, Paris, for being here. Your mom and sister, thank you very much. And the survivors that are here today, thanks to them for being here. You know, and to talk about an issue that's not talked about nearly enough here in Washington, D.C. Some of you know, most of you know that I spent most of my years in education. I dedicated my life to young people. I can tell you the most precious commodity in this country is not gold or silver. It's not oil or any kind of mineral. It's our young people. We take it for granted. They will decide the future of this country. We need to start understanding that. If we get everything right in this country but neglect our young people, this country is going to be in trouble. It's going to be in big trouble. Frankly, one of the reasons I ran for the Senate was because the last 20 years I saw how our educational system is declining. I've seen it with my own eyes. I know the reform that we need. I've been to some of these facilities just recently that Paris will talk about today. You know, they cost about what it costs to go to Harvard, but most of them look like something that came out of a Charles Dickens movie. Gloomy, dark. It's not something you'd want to be proud of. Right now, there's not enough oversight in some of these schools that Paris will talk about today. States are doing the best they can do to regulate, but we need to do more of a national level. We don't know where the money goes. We don't know who's making all the money. We don't understand the regulations that they're going through. But this bill simply takes and looks at the facilities and looks at them nationwide. This is not a central problem. This is a nationwide problem. There's an old saying that sunlight is the best disinfectant. We need to open our eyes and put the sun on what's going on in this country with these facilities. We need more sunlight on the facilities so we can stop the waste, the fraud, the drugs, and the abuse. It's time it stopped. Like I said, kids are literally our number one commodity. And we've got to open up as a country and understand that we've got to do better with all this. I'm proud today to support this bill. I stand with Senator Merkley and Senator Cornyn. Let's stand with them and give our kids a much, much brighter future and this country a brighter future. Thank you.
And now Ro Khanna from the House. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Senator Merkley, Senator Tuberville, Senator Cornyn, Representative Carter. It's wonderful to be here in a bipartisan, bicameral manner for a good cause. That doesn't happen often enough, and I'm glad on this we have come together. And I just want to recognize Caroline and Kyla. Survivors will be sharing their stories and what courage that takes. My colleagues have already talked about the substance of the bill, but I wanted to say a personal word about Carter, Paris's husband, as he's now known, and Paris and their family. You know, celebrities come in and out of this town. I've seen it in my 7 years. They fly in, they do a press conference, you have some bill introduced, and then they leave. What has impressed me about Paris's commitment and Carter's commitment is they didn't just do that. They came in 3 years ago, and I remember talking to Paris's mom and the sharing of the stories, and Emma Preston was talking to them as staff, and they said, we actually want to get legislation done. And month after month with the organizations, they've been working to meet members of Congress, meet senators on both sides of the aisle, on the relevant committees, doing the work to actually get something done. And that takes real commitment and real leadership and is very different than what a lot of other people do. So I'm grateful to them for actually helping move this legislation, and I'm confident with all of our help, we're going to get it across the finish line and do something good for America's kids. Thank you.
And Buddy Carter, also from the House. Welcome.
Well, thank you, and thank all of you for being here. Folks, this is important, extremely important. You know, when I met Paris Hilton last Congress, I obviously, meeting a celebrity, I was a little taken aback. But when she shared her story with me, I was horrified. I was horrified at that story. In fact, I think my comment at that time was, geez, this sounds like these facilities are run by the cartel. And, since that time, since I've been able to speak to experts and to advocates about this, I'm even more convinced that we have to act. Coach Tuberville is absolutely 100% correct. Our children are our future. Too often we act in a post-active way. We want to know what went wrong, what happened, why did this happen, and how could we have prevented it? Well, we need to be more proactive. This is an opportunity for us to be more proactive, an opportunity for us to make sure that we're getting the data, to make sure that we're accumulating that data and this information so that families, so that children can make decisions about what's going on in these facilities. Not only that, but it was mentioned about the money that the federal government and the state governments are sending to these facilities. Obviously, we are stewards of the taxpayers' money. We have a responsibility, not a right, but a responsibility as members of Congress to make sure that these funds are being utilized correctly. We need to make sure that these facilities, and there are some good ones, there are some that are doing what they're supposed to be doing, giving care, giving consultation, giving therapy, but there are also a lot of bad ones out there that are causing mental and physical and even sexual abuse. And that's what we need to identify. When I first met Paris Hilton, I obviously a little taken aback by the celebrity part of it. But now that she's back, and she continues to be back, as my colleague in the House indicated, this wasn't just a fly-by-night, one-time trip. She's been here, and she continues to come back. Now I have a great admiration for her courage and for all the survivors who are here, for their courage in bringing out this much-needed message to make sure that we all understand just how important it is that this be addressed. I'm honored to be a part of this. I'm going to work diligently to make sure that we get this legislation, this much-needed legislation, passed. Thank you again for your presence here. Thank you again for spreading the word, for making sure that all of us, not just members of Congress, but us as a society, that we're doing our part, that we're being responsible. Thank you, and God bless you.
Caroline Cole has her own life history and experience of challenges. Sometimes the institutions are referred to as the troubled teen industry, and she is a major national advocate for our children in these settings. Please join me in welcoming Caroline Cole.
Thank you. The boarding school of the future is what was plastered on a sign outside of the program where I was kept for 29 months. 29 months of no family, no birthdays, no milestones or precious events. 29 months of watching staff tackle children to the ground like they were less than human. That's 858 days that I detached from the reality of my situation so I could make it through. So much so that when I came back home, I didn't quite know who I was anymore. This was not like any boarding school that I had ever seen. The boarding school of the future, it read in sharp red letters on a sign that I saw when I walked through the doors for the very first time, not knowing that I wouldn't be the same the next time I crossed that threshold. The boarding school of the future, they told me when I could no longer continue my education because my credits from this school would not transfer anywhere. Forever making a distinction between who I might have been and the life I had now. My mom will tell you that she believed everything this boarding school of the future told her. How they would reunify our family, how they would heal us and help us, and how so many families before had had success when they worked the program. It took us years to discover that these promises were only finely tuned marketing, and that cost us everything. My mom will tell you that she was scammed. She was lied to. And she would do anything to undo the precious years that we lost together. The boarding school of the future, I want to thank you for one thing. I want to thank you for so significantly altering my life that I had no other option than to do something about it. I came to Washington, D.C. for the first time 2 years ago with very little hope. But as I look out at all of you, I see faces full of compassion and understanding, and I know that you, like me, believe that no child should ever have to endure what I and so many of us have. But the sad truth is that there are still countless children across the nation right now, at this moment, who are trapped in institutions and who are being robbed of their childhoods. But there is hope, and that's why we're here today. The Stop Institutional Child Abuse Act represents a crucial step towards ending the cycle of abuse and neglect that has gone on for far too long. Thank you to everyone who has chosen to listen and to believe us, no matter how shocking or sad our stories may be. As you listen to the other survivors here today, believe them. Hang on every word. Believe what they're going to tell you about their lived experience. Because when you do, it allows us to heal. It allows us to have justice and to rest, knowing that other children won't have to experience the same harm that we did. We cannot change the past. What happened to me, what happened to Paris, and what happened to so many other children is already done. But we can shape the future. We must work together to ensure that the Stop Institutional Child Abuse Act passes through this Congress and becomes law so that I and my community of survivors can finally overcome our suffering, our resentment, and our trauma, and proudly call what these programs should have always been a boarding school of the past. Thank you.
Caroline, thank you for sharing your story and being such a fierce advocate. Kayla Musquiz is also with us, and she was placed in 7 facilities in 3 states throughout her childhood. She's now in college, and she has bravely come to tell us her story as well. Kayla, welcome.
So first, I want to express my gratitude to all those who are in attendance today and to everyone who has worked so diligently to draft the Stop Institutional Child Abuse Act. It is an honor to share my lived experience in such a public and important forum. My name is Kayla Musquiz. I am from the Rio Grande Valley, born in Brownsville, Texas. And as a young child, I enjoyed having both the ocean and Mexico as my backyard. Although my mother was single and disabled, she always provided me with a life full of love by taking me to church and making sure I had everything I needed in school with my accommodations as a disabled student. And unfortunately, in 2005, when I was 9 years old and in 3rd grade, my mother was killed in a horrific car crash on her way to pick me up from school. And overnight, my happy life turned towards darkness. After my mother's death, I was placed in the custody of my biological father, who for 2 years physically, sexually, and mentally abused me. When CPS finally intervened, I thought that they were going to save me. I thought that they would place me with people who would love and care for me in ways my own father wasn't able to. I thought that I would stay close to the community, friendships, and support circles that had helped me to endure so much through my early life already. But I was wrong, and instead CPS took me from one traumatic environment and just placed me into a new one, and that's called the troubled teen industry. Even though I entered the foster care system because I was a victim of abuse, I was treated more like a criminal in these places. At one troubled teen industry program, staff would forcibly pull down my pants to inject a cocktail of pharmaceutical sedatives into the space where my thigh meets my butt. This practice was so common that myself and other youth in the program referred to this procedure as booty juice. I was just a child, and at another treatment facility called Island View Academy in Utah, I was labeled attention seeking, and I was denied medical treatment for symptoms that would later be diagnosed as Hashimoto's thyroiditis, a potentially life-threatening autoimmune disorder. And I wonder if earlier treatment might have prevented me from the disability I suffered today. Throughout my time in foster care, I traveled nearly 7,000 miles to at least 8 different troubled teen industry programs in states as far away as North Carolina and Utah. And instead of receiving love and care, I endured frequent physical and chemical restraints. I was over-medicated, isolated. There were many punitive punishments and neglect. I didn't feel safe, and I didn't feel provided for. I didn't feel like I had any connection to the world or life I had known prior to entering the system. I was lost, disconnected, afraid, and alone. As sad as my story may sound, I am one of the lucky ones. As they mentioned earlier, Cornelius Fredericks was only 16 years old when he was sent to Lakeside Academy in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And back in 2020, multiple staff members held him down in a prone restraint where he lost consciousness and he stopped breathing. He died of asphyxiation. That could have been me, and in Texas alone, at least 100 foster children have died while in the state's care since 2020. Those who survive do not emerge unscathed, as former foster youth experience higher levels of incarceration, homelessness, addiction, and even our life expectancy is impacted by our institutionalization. It sometimes feels like the world forgot about me, forgot that one day I would find my voice as an adult. And today, I've reclaimed my power, and I've dedicated my life by using my lived experience in both the foster care system and troubled teen industry to ensure that no other youth has to go through what I had to. I'll just read one last part. The Stop Institutional Child Abuse Act brings us one step closer to the future I envision, a future in which all children, including foster youth, are protected from the abuse and neglect in troubled teen industry programs. A future where children's educational rights, bodily autonomy, and dignity are respected no matter where they live or who is responsible for caring for them. A future in which our taxpayer dollars are no longer funding the abuse of vulnerable children. And as a survivor and fellow American, I'm asking for your help, and I'm begging you to care enough to take real action and join me in supporting the Stop Institutional Child Abuse Act. Thank you.
Kayla, you have definitely found your voice and reclaimed your power, and thank you for bringing that to bear today. Well done. Jessica Jackson is also a survivor of institutional abuse, and now is in a world where she is a human rights attorney and also a former mayor from California. Welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. I don't think I'll ever forget the night that I woke up at 15 to find out that there were 2 men I'd never met before there to take me to Texas in the middle of the night. I was angry, I was sad, and I was scared for what I thought was going to come. But I really had no idea what was going to come. I had no idea that I would be spending my days walking through the wilderness with a pack of my belongings. I had no idea that they were going to take our clothes at night so that we wouldn't run away. I had no idea that when I did run away without my clothes, I would get feet full of cactus, and I'd be told to suck it up, put my boots back on, even though each step hurt even more. I had no idea that workouts would be used as a form of punishment, exacerbating my already existing eating disorder for years to come. I had no idea that later I'd be forced to stand in front of a school and call myself dirty for breaking a school rule over and over again. I don't think my parents had any idea what they were signing up for either. I don't think that my parents had any idea that by spending my college savings on these programs, they were exposing me to more trauma. They believed they were going to be able to save my life. See, I'd lost my way somewhere around 12, 13. I was medicating my own depression. I even attempted to take my life. What I really needed was love, not exposure to the abuse in these programs. I also had no idea, though, at the time, that one day I'd be standing here in front of a crowd of people who think that what happened to me and everyone up here was wrong. I had no idea that legislators from both sides of the aisle would come together in probably the most political divided time in my lifetime to join forces and stop this from happening to other kids. So as sad as I am for that 15-year-old girl who struggled, who dropped out of high school the day I turned 18, later got my GED, later got back on the right path, but who spent years dealing with drug addiction, self-hate, and depression. As sad as I am for her, I'm filled with hope today for all of the kids in these programs. So I want to thank our legislators for their bravery. I want to thank Paris for opening up and sharing her story with the world through her platform. I want to thank the other survivors for showing courage and encouraging me to speak out about this for the first time in my life. And I want to thank all of you for your support. Thank you.
Jessica, thank you for bringing your story, as you put it, for the first time in your life, to add to the stories that each of our survivors is telling. And we so appreciate that all of you are here to hear these stories. And we're also appreciative of the fact that we have experts on foster care involved in this conversation, experts on child welfare. And I'd like to introduce Sixto Cancel, who's CEO of the nonprofit Think of Us, and he and his team have been of vital value in developing this bill. Welcome, Sixto.
Good afternoon, everyone. That's where you say good afternoon back.
Good afternoon.
There we go. I want to start off by sharing a moment when I was 7 years old. I was hidden in the neighbor's kitchen cabinet along with my little brothers. Police cars lined the entire block. It really looked like a hostage situation. My mother was given a choice: either sign us over to the foster care system and go to rehab, or go to jail. When she finally brought us out, we were rushed into those state cars, and we were driven off. Little did I know that it would take 8 years before I saw my little brother again. 8 years later, I would be driven to a remote part of Connecticut, and then I would be before a facility with barbed wires, with a police car saying the Department of Children and Families. I would go in, check in at the security desk, and they would have metal detectors. We would go through door number 1, click, through the hallway, search, door number 2, click, finally in the visitation room. And when my brother came out, the first thing he said to me was, look at what they did to me, pointing to his chin where he had a scar from the restraints that he had experienced. He would go on to tell me stories about what was happening, from sexual abuse to staff forcing you to fight as entertainment, to the random searches to go ahead and play mind games with each of the young people who were living there. And I'll be honest with you, there were many times I thought he might be exaggerating. There were many times that I thought, well, he might just be going a little bit telling too much. And there were many times I thought to myself, well, I wonder what he did to be in this type of jail. But little did I know there was no crime. And it wasn't until our organization, Think of Us, started a research effort, spearheaded a research effort to understand what are the experiences of these young people in these group homes that have been in foster care. And it is there where the stories that he told me echoed. It echoed of abuse, trauma that was consistent day after day. It was that report that helped inform litigation brought on by the United States Department of Justice, quoted 3 times in an amicus brief to United States Supreme Court. It is people's lived experience that we have to start listening to and understanding so that it informs how do we do this right. It was in that story, it was in his story and so many others that we learned that restraints are one of the things that put our young people in danger. Cornelius Frederick, you've heard about him over and over in today's press conference. Not 1 minute, not 2 minutes, not 3, not 5, but 12 minutes he was restrained, where video will show him throwing a sandwich, and the consequence of throwing a sandwich was his life. He was restrained to the point where he could not even yell no longer, "I can't breathe." And he drew his last breath on the floors of these facilities in the custody of the state. I'm delighted today that we're introducing legislation. We can never right the wrong that has happened, and that it will never right all of the lives that we've lost. And I wish these stories were unique, but they're not. That multiple young people have experienced all of these traumatic abuses and death. Today, we're delighted that the introduction of the Stop Institutional Child Abuse Act, a critical piece of legislation that aims to keep young people safe physically, mentally, and emotionally. My sincere gratitude to every legislator here who is being brave to go ahead and make sure that we do 2 very important things. Number 1, we take the first step in solving the problem by gathering data, establishing a national database. We cannot solve problems we cannot see. We need evidence. And so therefore, this legislation is the first step in doing that. Number 2, we need accountability. When bad things happen to children, especially when the official parent of that child is the state, is the United States government, the most powerful government in the world, there needs to be a mechanism where those lived experiences are heard and brought forward and policy recommendations are made. So this is a no-brainer legislation. This is not a political ploy. This is very concretely, let's make sure we take the very first step in being able to get data and a pathway to make sure that we have designed and regulated these institutions the right way. I want to thank you all for being here today. But I want to tell you that today is just the beginning of this, and that the folks behind us right here, Paris, thank you for your work. Legislators, thank you for your work. That it's the beginning of us going to the next phase, and we're going to need your help. We're going to need you to step up and to join this movement. Thank you for being here.
I never introduced myself, Jeff Merkley of Oregon. And a year ago, we were out here on the lawn, on the other side, on the House side, and Paris and Carter were just about to head off to get married and head out on a honeymoon. So congratulations on your first year of marriage. And as I think about what we're doing today, we're saying the next generation should never be impacted the way the last generation was. And there is a new generation on its way in the Paris and Carter family. Little Phoenix, congratulations on your son. Congratulations on your son. And so good to have Phoenix's aunt and Phoenix's grandmother with us today, helping to carry this forward, a better future for the next generation. Thank you. This bill does establish a federal work group on youth residential programs to do the research, the reports, the data, the best practices, the systems, to understand everything we can, because we don't understand this whole huge breadth in which 60,000 American children are sent into because there isn't currently reporting and there isn't currently oversight. And we expect to be back here next year on the next step of this, where we have that understanding and information to say, okay, here's how the oversight should be established. As Sixto said, we need accountability. How do we establish that accountability? And that will be the next powerful step. We would not be here today if Paris Hilton hadn't taken her childhood experience and said, I'm going to make a difference for others. She's been engaged now year after year. I'd like to say month after month. You always hope something will happen fast, but it does take time to build an understanding and build a coalition. And today it's a huge stride forward. Thank you, Paris, for being the national voice who was creating the passion, the energy, the understanding, the necessity of moving forward to protect our teenage Americans from institutional abuse. Please join me in welcome Paris Hilton.
Good afternoon. I'm Paris Hilton, and I'm so grateful to announce the introduction of the Bipartisan Stop Institutional Child Abuse Act. This groundbreaking legislation is only possible because lawmakers on both sides of the aisle chose to listen to survivors. I would like to express my deepest gratitude to the bill's sponsors, Congressman Khanna, Congressman Carter, Senator Merkley, and Senator Cornyn, and all the original co-sponsors for their unwavering commitment to protecting vulnerable youth from abuse, neglect, and preventable death in the troubled teen industry. This issue is deeply personal for me. From the ages of 16 to 18, I was sent to 4 troubled teen industry facilities. Each one was more horrific than the last. I witnessed and experienced sexual abuse from adult staff, as well as endured verbal and emotional abuse daily. I was yelled at, dehumanized, silenced, and stripped of any semblance of privacy. When I attempted to tell my parents about the abuse on the phone, the staff would immediately hang up the phone and punish me. On top of this, we had no access to the outside doors, no sunlight, no fresh air. These were considered privileges. What I went through will haunt me for the rest of my life. Can you imagine your teenage daughter being watched in the shower by male staff? What if you thought your kid was receiving treatment but was actually locked in a solitary confinement cell? What would you do if you found out that your child was being restrained by multiple staff members? How would you feel if you found out later that your child was being injected with sedatives that made them numb for days at a time? All of this was happening without them being able to tell you. As a new mom, I couldn't imagine being deceived like this, like so many parents, including my own, were. One of the many issues with these programs is that parents sign away all the rights and know nothing about what is going on. My family was lied to and manipulated just like so many other families. Every day in America, children in residential facilities are being physically, emotionally, and sexually abused by those responsible for their care. I'm never going to get my childhood back, but some of these children are losing their futures too. Children like Naomi Wood. 1 year ago, I stood here on the Capitol grounds, hand in hand with Naomi's grieving family. Naomi was robbed of her future at the age of 17 by Lakeland Girls Academy, a residential treatment program in Florida. For weeks, Naomi was in need of severe medical attention, but was ignored by staff. All she was given was soup and Pepto-Bismol, and because she didn't receive proper medical care, Naomi died a week later, alone in her room, thousands of miles away from her family. Naomi's family was never notified of their daughter's condition until it was too late. I wish I could say that Naomi's family was the last to grieve the loss of a child in a facility, but in the time since I last spoke to you all about the urgent need for legislation, at least 5 more children have lost their lives. How many more children need to die until you take action? I am determined to use my platform and resources to make a difference, and the Stop Institutional Child Abuse Act is where we need to start to address these abuses. I believe the greatest thing one could ever do is change history for others, and that is why I fought tirelessly for 2.5 years to ensure lawmakers understand the gravity of this issue on the state and federal level. Since I shared my story publicly in my documentary, This is Paris, we've supported the successful passage of 7 state laws. Other states have started to investigate the issue, and thousands of survivors have finally found their voices and no longer feel ashamed to say what happened to them. But as long as the abuse is still happening, and it is, our job is not done. That's why we need you, every member of Congress and every state official, to join forces to stop institutional child abuse. I am a proud businesswoman, I'm a mom, I'm a survivor, and deep in my heart is a child who deserved to be protected. I will never forget the helplessness of sitting in solitary confinement, dreaming about someone saving me from that hell. 20 years later, I and hundreds of survivors gathered outside of Provo Canyon School in Utah. It was then I realized I was not the only one who needed saving. The facility boarded up the windows so the children inside couldn't see us. It was devastating knowing that they were on the other side. A few months later, I was contacted by a young survivor who had just gotten out of Provo Canyon School. Even though they couldn't see us fighting from them that day, she said that all the children knew that we were there, and it gave them some hope. So today, with the introduction of the Stop Institutional Child Abuse Act, I want to send a message to all the children that are trapped in treatment. You are so much more than your trauma. Your stories matter, and together we can help end the silent abuse and neglect happening right now in every state. It is so important we all speak out for all of the survivors who have been too afraid to come forward. You are not alone. I'm speaking up for you, those who have suffered, and those who are no longer with us. We love you, and you are not forgotten. I'm speaking up because this industry profits by silence, and those who need the most help are taking advantage of instead. I'm speaking up to end the cycle of trauma and abuse that runs rampant in these facilities. To Majority Leader Schumer and Speaker McCarthy, I ask that you please prioritize the Stop Institutional Child Abuse Act and pass the bill this year. To our elected officials who have the ability to stop these deaths and to end this abuse, I encourage you to co-sponsor this bipartisan legislation. Nelson Mandela once said, "There is no keener revelation of a society's soul than the way in which it treats its children." The introduction of this bill sends a resounding message that child abuse has no place in our society. We cannot continue to play politics with children's lives. Thank you.